this is the Provoked Prawn, and I'm here to compare two fantastic super ultra lightweight pro grade gaming mice, the ROG Harpe Ace AimLab edition seen here in black, and the Razer Viper V2 Pro. These are both super ultra lightweight mice with a number of really interesting highlights to them, some superb specs, and other things that make them interesting. I've done separate videos talking about the various features of them, but here I'm going to compare the highlights and the lowlights and talk about the different features of them that make them interesting, as well as showing them side by side and giving a sound test at the end so you can hear the difference between them. You'll notice some striking differences here. Obviously one's black and one's white, but there are other things. For example, the Harpe Ace has that AimLab logo on the side which you can light up with a UV torch, which is curious. When I looked at the Harpe AimLab edition, it immediately reminded me of the superlight, which I've also compared with the Viper V2 Pro, because the Razer Viper mouse was an ultra lightweight mouse with some striking similarities to the superlight, which is a fantastic and highly popular gaming mouse, and so I made a logical comparison, and so I'm doing the same again now. I've done a video recently to compare that Harpe Ace with the superlight, so I'll link to that in the description. But here I want to talk to you about the differences between these two instead, and you'll see some quite interesting highlights. Now, the Viper has been a long-term favorite of a lot of people, and there's a number of reasons why it's pretty fantastic. It has some serious specs that include up to 30,000 DPI, 750 IPS, 70G max acceleration, 5 programmable buttons, and more importantly, optical switches. The Harpe AimLab edition also has some neat features of its own. It has actually a higher DPI at 36,000. The max speed and IPS are a little bit less though. You've got a max speed of 650 IPS and 50 Gs acceleration. However, there are some other highlights. You will have noticed already, for example, that the Harpe Ace has RGB on the mouse wheel, whereas the Viper doesn't have any RGB. And that is actually useful because it lets you know when you're switching DPI and also when you're running low on battery. Now, if you put the two side by side, you will notice ever so slightly different size and shape. Negligible. There's not much in it, and you'll see some more shots of this in a minute. On the underside, you'll also notice they've both got those PTFE feet. They both got USB-C charging. But one point of note is that the Harpe Ace has Bluetooth as well as 2.4 gigahertz, so it has the ability to do that. And obviously, you'll also potentially get more out of the Viper in terms of battery life, although they both make claims at similar sort of 80 or 90 hours. So really depend on your use, but obviously the Harpe has the RGB, which will have a negative impact on it. You will notice there's a DPI button on the underside of the Harpe Ace as well. Now, obviously the main point here is that super lightweight design, and the Harpe Ace is one of the lightest mice that I've tried, coming in at 55 grams, and yet it doesn't feel cheap or horrible in the hand, which I was quite surprised by. And that's definitely a highlight. The Viper V2 Pro is marginally weightier at 59, although it's worth noting the black one is actually lighter than that. So if you purchase the black version of the Viper, you'll get a lighter one. Now, both come with a similar setup in the box. Obviously, you've got the 2.4 gigahertz dongle, USB-C charging cable, and you have some grip tape. You also have an adapter so you can plug in the cable and put the dongle near the mouse if you need to. I did find that the Harpe Ace's signal wasn't quite as good as I was expecting, so if you're a long distance from your PC, you might well need to do that. So you have that flexibility to do that there. And you can see that the Viper V2 Pro has a similar setup. Obviously, you have less connectivity options with the Viper, but it is worth noting that that mouse has not only the 1000 Hz polling rate, but it's also upgradable to 4000 Hz if you purchase the Razer Hyper polling dongle, which I've done a video on separately. So that's pretty nuts because it will give you a faster response and a lower latency. So both mice are really high spec'd in that regard. Obviously, you also have the ability to add grip tape to either, as you've seen, and it'll change the aesthetic and add a marginal bit more weight, but also make it grippier. That isn't something that I struggled with, though, with either of the mice. And you will notice that the Harpe has sort of matte finish to it from some of these shots, and so does the Viper. They're easy to hold on to. Although ergonomics wise, I think maybe the Harpe is a little bit more comfortable for me personally because it sits a little bit higher off the desk, which makes it push into the palm a little bit more. But this is going to vary. Obviously, if you're a claw gripper, you probably won't notice the difference. As a palm gripper, personally, I marginally prefer the Viper, although actually there is another preference from Razer that I'll get to in a minute. Now, the Harpe Aim Lab edition obviously has that little clue in the name and in the logo as to what makes it the more interesting of the two, potentially. And you'll see some nice highlights that include, obviously, those blue buttons on the side, a little bit of textured grip there as well. But the thing that's interesting is not the fact that it has a UV logo on it, which is pretty pointless in my mind, but the addition of the sort of software. Obviously, this is a mouse that's designed to work with pros, is aimed at the pro gamers and the people that want to aspire to be a better gamer with high-end specs and obviously a lightweight design. But it also has that tie-in with AimLab. Now, AimLab is a free bit of software that you can download on PC that you can then use to test and improve your aim. One of the things that this has is the settings optimizer. So settings optimizer allows you to run through a variety of tests for sensitivity, mouse DPI, angle tuning, and lift-off distance. You run through these various tests that take like 10 minutes each, and then you basically put through your paces, and at the end it will give you the results and recommendations for the best settings for the mouse. In this instance, you can see that the mouse recommended 800 DPI. This is actually quite a bit lower than I'd normally use, which is quite surprising to me. So you can then automatically apply that to the mouse, or obviously manually do it via the software or even at a hardware level because you have the DPI button on the other side. But the point here is that it's basically showing you, based on those tests, what the recommended settings will be for your personal play style. So the way you move the mouse, the way you hold the mouse, the way you flick it around. Obviously, that's going to vary from person to person. This is one of the most interesting things I've seen from our mouse design because it's really unusual. And I don't think it's a gimmick. I think it's actually quite a clever way of doing it because you might just default to putting it on a certain speed or try and have difficulty working out what the best DPI and sensitivity levels are for you. And now you can obviously work that out. Now, you could use AimLab normally with any mouse and sort of fathom these things, but obviously it's integrated with the Harpe Ace, which makes it fairly interesting. That's not to say that the Viper V2 Pro isn't a fantastic option, though. During my tests, I found it was really responsive. Obviously, it also has those optical switches, which means it actuates really accurately and theoretically should last longer. It's guaranteed up to 90 million clicks with those buttons. And you found that they're really responsive and fast, and there's not any pre-travel or any problems with it. And it's just a really agile mouse in a variety of situations. Whether either of these mice will make you a pro, though, remains to be seen. I'm not a particularly good gamer. However, the other thing that I will note is I actually personally prefer the Death Adder, which you can see here. I've done a video on this separately because it has a taller body. It sits higher and it pushes up into my palm in a more comfortable way. So check out those reviews linked in the description and stick around now for a sound test to hear the differences.
You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos, you might well find them interesting or useful, and most importantly, have a great life.